Okay. Good evening, welcome. Thank you to the county for organizing this, Goldie, Leslie. Thank you to Pat Hines, Kevin Sneed for taking the time to be here this evening. I'm Sridhar Ganesan, Vice President on the Reston Association Board of Directors. We sent you a list of questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through them and think about those questions. This group has gone through the report that you have in your hands, Kevin, the Capital Improvement Plan Program Report, 2019 to 2023. The broad question that we have, as a group, that we would have obviously is that how much did that report take into account the proposed increase in density from the county that's come up within the last 1 year. So I don't know if that report reflects the projected growth from that, because the potential obviously is going to be doubling of the population possibly of Reston, but we'll go through all that.
Okay.
So that's a big question that we would have, and the list of questions is pretty long. I think you've looked at them, and we may not be able to go through all of them today, but hopefully we can agree that we'll meet again and complete that list, because I think that's very important for the community. I suggest that we go till 7:30 and then basically talk about next steps and in terms of next meetings, what are the action items and what we would do, and audience, if there are in fact any questions. First, some introductions, and as you're introducing yourself, please make any brief comments that you might have on this small group meeting topic. Andy, why don't you go first?
Thank you. I'm Andy Siegel, the RA Board President, and I just really, again, want to echo Sridhar's comments. I really appreciate the county, CPR, and RA for coming together so that we can have these community meetings to talk about issues that are concerning to Restonians, and to hopefully get more data so we can be more informed, and as we get more informed, hopefully less concerned. So thank you.
All right, great. My name is Moira Callahan, and I am a mother. I am a certified teacher in Virginia. I'm a former Fairfax County Public Schools teacher. I've been very active in the community, and I've moved a lot in my life. And I would like to say that the number one factor when you're looking for a place to live is schools. One of the number one factors, employment, of course, plays a role. Affordable housing plays a role, but schools plays a very important role. Studies show that schools have a direct impact on property values, and virtually every buyer is concerned about their property value and wants to make a sound investment. The one thing I would suggest is that we definitely try to keep this high level and be aware of use of acronyms, because they're used a lot in the school system and they can be hard for people to follow.
Pick up. Yeah. Stu.
I'm Stu Gibson, and I'm aging in place. I used to be I was served on the school board for 16 years representing Hunter Mill District. Now Pat has that seat. My kids grew up in Fairfax County Public Schools. As a matter of fact, we moved here when my older daughter was 1. She's now 35 and a mother of a 5-month-old. So, not in Reston. So I'm interested because we've lived in the same house for 31 years, and I like the character of Reston, and I'd like to keep the character of Reston as Reston.
Todd.
I'm Todd Shea. I'm simply a parent. I'm a product of Fairfax County Public Schools, and I also have 2 children in the elementary school system as we sit here. So just more here as a parent and trying to make sure we're still directing ourselves on the correct path for what's best for the county and parents.
Bob Petrine, I'm a former parent and grandparent, and I don't think I can add much to what others have already said and keep it short. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Pat Hines, I'm the current school board member from the Hunter Mill District, the Fairfax County School Board. I'm also a teacher. I'm teaching in Arlington County these days, yeah. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I'm Leslie Johnson, and I'm with Zoning Administration. I'm filling in for Fred, who is down at our Virginia APA conference accepting an award for the Embark Plan Amendment and also speaking on affordable housing. So that's where he is.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm last.
But not least.
Not least. My name is Kevin Sneed. I oversee both the Office of Design and Construction and the Planning Office. So projections, boundaries, those sorts of things beyond the design and construction of all the schools. So I've worked for the school system for 30 years. Next month it'll be 31 years. I grew up in Fairfax County as well, in Vienna, and I live in Herndon. My wife is an assistant principal there. She was a teacher as well. Both my daughters graduated from Fairfax County. When I was little, I used to come to Reston because my aunt and uncle lived here with my cousins. So it wasn't too bad driving up Hunter Mill Road. It was a little bit less traffic back in the 70s than today. So I just want to, you asked kind of a unique question about does the RCIP necessarily reflect development in the future? And we know that we have three areas. I'm pretty certain about that. Where we are going to have new high density development. So one is Tyson's. Let me already reference Embark, which is Route 1, and then the third is here along the Silver Line. Mm-hmm. And with Reston, we kind of hit a sweet spot. What happened was we were renovating the schools, and we saw this development brewing. And as you know, when we renovate, we also add capacity. Mm-hmm. The goal is to eliminate trailers if possible. Well, in this particular case, you guys have a couple of different things that are occurring. One is that the South Lakes, I'm going to refer to it now as South Lakes Pyramid because that's how we look at it. The pyramid has been dropping in enrollment over the last 3 years, and it's not just a little bit, it's a significant amount. So there will be a time where the enrollment will increase. So this doesn't even include the particular development that we're talking about. So over the next, let's say, I'll give you an example. Over the next 5 years with the projected enrollment, we're going to have around 1,700 additional seats in the South Lakes Pyramid. That's elementary, middle, and high. That's an incredible. We do not have a single high school pyramid with this many seats. Now, the reason that we did it, one, was to make sure that we're able to absorb the development along the Silver Line. Mm-hmm. In addition, in anticipation of this, but it's kind of a twofold issue, is that Hunter's Woods has around 300 or so students that come in, not just for the magnet program, but for AAP. So there's 3 AAP centers in South Lakes Pyramid, which is really, really unusual. Well, we've had this movement with the board over the last 5 or 6 years, especially in regard to AAP centers, is that we're pulling kids out of their pyramid. So which our preference would be the pyramid, those cohorts, those kids would stay together. So the bulk of the kids at Hunter's Woods actually come from Weightless Mill Elementary, which is an Oakton feeder. And for a number of years, they've requested that they are educated within the pyramid. So we actually have a new elementary school that we're going to build in the Fairfax-Oakton area. Mm-hmm. So when I gave you that number of 1,700 seats, it could be almost 2,000 once the Weightless Mill AAP students are returned to the pyramid. In addition, we have both Aldrin and Armstrong students who are at Forest Edge. Clearview, which is the Herndon, and both those schools are Herndon feeders. Clearview is about to undergo renovation. At the conclusion of that renovation, we anticipate to return those students to the pyramid. So you can see that we're going to have additional seats here. Now, the other thing to anticipate is when we look at this type of development, right, because these are mostly multifamily, but the style of the unit does not necessarily mean, we do not see high yields of students for the first 15 years or so of these particular types of units. It's only after that time, 20, 25 years, that you start to see students. And to give you an example, I don't know if anybody remembers when Skyline was built, okay? We all remember it if we're old enough, like me. But remember when Skyline fell and they rebuilt it? We did not see a lot of kids out of Skyline, but today we do. There's a lot, because what happens over time is those units become much more affordable. 2 years ago, I had some complaints. I won't mention the specific school, but it was down in Tyson's. We had, when you drive on the toll road or around Tyson's, you see the big building that says Adair or Ascent. They built a couple of high-rises. Well, we don't have, I think that the two, both of the buildings together, we had around 21 students. I mean, and these are massive structures. And so we had one of the schools nearby was complaining. They thought that these new buildings had generated the students, but they hadn't. What had generated the students was the old rotunda in downtown Tyson's. These are older, and there's a couple other units. That's where the students were coming from. It wasn't from the new buildings. Now, that doesn't mean over time that this high density, these developments won't produce students. It just means it is going to be, it's just not an immediate, you just don't see the students immediately. Our biggest concern, which isn't very far away, we call it the Dulles Suburban Corridor, is over next to McNair, Coates, and Hutchinson Elementary. And so there we have 10,000 units being built between these three elementary schools, which are closer than a mile apart each. And McNair is so big, we're going to build a second building on the back of the property. And in that case, we don't have a good solution. We don't have surplus seats in the vicinity. We're looking at 3,000 students, where I'm going to already have 4 elementary schools. I don't have a high school or a middle school to accommodate that. We don't, our expectation, and I noticed when I read through some of the questions somebody asked, where would we build a new high school? Well, no, I think that one of the things you want to look at, and I'm not complaining, so we don't have sufficient funds to purchase the land. So when this developer in that particular area, they wanted us to buy the site, even though it was being rezoned from commercial to residential, and they wanted $2.5 million an acre. So you can imagine if I had to buy a high school site here, the county just raised our yearly cash flow from $155 million to $180 million, but just to buy a high school site would take out an entire year, and not only that, it would disrupt the entire cash flow for a number of years if you were to do a one-time payment. And the challenge for our board is the fact that our schools, even though most of these, almost all the schools in the South Lakes Pyramid have been renovated, we have a number that have not been renovated, and it's a real balance between where do we add capacity. We're not able to purchase land, which is why our schools are getting bigger. Our average renovation cycle right now is 37 years. From the time a school is built till we get back in there to renovate. I mean, we're in Herndon. It's now 51 years, and they have the exact same windows, the exact same doors. I was walking the hallway the other day. There's no ceilings, of course, because we're renovating. And, they have the original pipe in there, and it's not the only school. We have a number of schools like that. Even Fox Mill Elementary, I'm getting ready to write the contract for that architect. I believe that school opened in 1979. And so that's going to be renovated as well.
Can I pause you for a second? Can we ask you questions?
Sure,
I know you wanted to make some overview comments,
Without even
but
looking.
you've dived into the questions and
I
the
know.
detail a little bit. But that's okay. If you can ask questions, maybe we can do that interactively. Stu, you had some questions.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
just want to follow up on a couple of things that you said, Kevin, because it's important to bear in mind that there's two different density issues we're talking about. We're talking about density in the corridor, which is not part of the zoning amendment to increase Reston density from 13 to 16 per acre. That's in the village centers.
Right.
So you're talking about high-rises in the transit corridor, but you haven't talked about additional development in the rest of Reston. And I guess the biggest question, I mean, a lot of what you're saying sounds very familiar to me, even though I left the board almost 7 years ago. But part of the issue is so many of these proposals have not even been presented to the county yet. A lot of the proposals from 13 to 16 are waiting for the Board of Supervisors to even see if they're going to increase the cap. So you have a high school and 2 elementary schools on the CIP. The elementary school is Fairfax Oakton, you just said, but you've got a Northwest County High School and you've got a Silverline Elementary School that's on the CIP that the board approved. And we're just wondering, what are the enrollment projections that you're relying on? Because you just told us that you have more than enough elementary school capacity in Reston to handle high-rise development in the transit corridor in Reston. So what projections are you relying on for that?
So, well, again, that is not within this pyramid. That is actually in Drainsville. There's a little bit in this magisterial district. So those 10,000 homes are in the Drainsville district, in between Coates, McNair, and Hutchinson.
Well, McNair is in.
Right, it is, but Coates is in Drainsville.
Right.
It's on that side. It's basically, these 10,000 homes are from Framingham Road off of 28, inside, and then west of Old Centerville Road to the toll road. That's where these 10,000 homes are. These are not high rises. These are townhomes and 2-over-2 condominiums. So one of the questions that was asked, I read through them. One of the questions is about the student yields. How do we do this? So regarding profit contributions are different, meaning the yields that are calculated are different than we might anticipate on the school side. Okay, so the way the profit formula is written, let's say it's a 2-over-2 condominium. The way that it's calculated is the county wants us to say what's the average yield throughout the county, regardless of location. What do 2-over-2s produce, or what do townhomes produce? Our actual student projections, we would regionalize it. We would look in the particular area because you have different behavior. We know that. So some places you could have townhomes and you don't have a lot of kids, and other places you do. So the density in that particular area there is very high. That's why I have Coates, and then now I'm going to have 2 schools. So the concern that we have, clearly, we're trying to buffer the South Lakes Pyramid, and then we're trying, and the timing of this high school is to anticipate that. So under the student yield formula, that's the proper countywide, it would be lower than what we think it's going to be. We actually think it's going to be about 3,000 students there.
How,
I'm sorry, just
Because of we would look
I
at.
understand what you're saying. What you're saying is the additional buildings that are approved in the CIP are premised on development way west of Reston. I get that. It doesn't sound to me like I've heard, at least we haven't heard you talk about yield projections for additional development within Reston. You've talked about how many empty seats there are, but you haven't talked about yield projections for Reston, increased density in the transit corridor and increased density in the village center. So you haven't talked about that at all.
So, specific question around that is, have you sat down with the county, the planning and zoning, Leslie Johnson, for example, right, and had conversations about, the 13 to 16, the moment that was proposed? Has there been any interaction in
For us,
projections versus your projections?
Well, Sue's already alluded to the fact that once it moves through them, it comes to us for review.
Right.
Yeah. Now, let me
So
say this.
which means it's not been included.
Well, he's talking about, the plan's been adopted.
Yeah.
And so they're looking at individual development
Mhm.
applications as they come through to make a determination as what, based on the number of units, the type of units, what that projection may be, and that's what we base, when you see the proffers and
So
for all those individual.
Again, to rephrase, so 13 to 16, there is a projection in terms of population growth in Reston, independent of the TSA. So my question, our question is very simply,
So,
has that growth been taken into account for these projections?
you're
That's
asking
all.
a couple, I mean, now.
Not just in terms
That,
of.
that growth was taken into account when the plan was adopted, because there were projections and assumptions made at that time when they were doing the planning effort to determine what the school's needs were. And
So what are those projections? What are the expected student yields as a result of increased density in the transit corridor and increased density in the village centers?
So, or let me go back so I can try to describe, because you guys are asking multiple level questions here, okay? The first thing is the timing, and I think Pat recalls this conversation. It might have been right after you left the board, Steve, but a lot of times, so our primary interest, besides being able to pre-plan, because we do not have the funding to build capacity until it's needed. Okay, we do not. I mean, it would be great, everybody would be happy, but it's just not possible with the amount of money that we have. So the real question is, what time do we have to add capacity to a region? Especially with new development, we have to try to time it out correctly. So we used the Tyson's development was one of the first times we sat down with our board to say, hey, look, this is what we were told. They had 7 buildings, and they were all supposed to be completed in 2015, I think. They were only through 3, and they're still only through 3. And we do have a future high school, 5-story, or an elementary school in Tyson's, but we're not going to build it until we have adequate, need for it. So and that could very well be the case here. You could have development that is planned, but the question is, when is it actually constructed? And there's all types of forces outside of us, type of capital and things in the marketplace. So so how would this work for Reston? Well, something is going to get developed. I don't even know the timing because I haven't really even started it. And the question is, how quickly do we start to fill the seats that we have that are going to be surplus? And that is a certainty at this point, at least probably for 8 to 10 years. The second piece of it is, even in my our 10-year, our long, because our cash flow is only for over a 5-year period of time. We started to add the 10-year because people were asking questions, and this, and it changes. So whatever's in that 10-year can change. If development doesn't occur, you asked about the Silver Line Elementary, which is going to be in the suburban corridor, and those developments don't happen, we'll push it out to the future until we need to do it. I mean, projects are going to move based on that. The other thing is, if we start to see this development in the South Lakes Reston area occur rapidly, then we'll insert the project here. What we learned, and I'm talking about we, meaning both us and the county, was what happened at the Dulles Suburban Corridor, we can't do. I only have one school site. I didn't get the funding for a school. I mean, so that's going to come out of our capital program. We didn't get the funding, 3,000 kids is going to generate just half a high and half a middle and 2 elementary schools. The proffers don't even come close to paying for that.
Let's go back to the proffer really
Right.
quickly. I wanted to ask you, so you're saying that the county has a general proffer formula and you are wanting to be a little bit more specific, regional, because you're finding some higher numbers. How can we ensure that that changes so that we can have appropriate funding or proffer levels for you that you're seeking?
Well, the good thing is,
What has to happen?
so that exercise there in the Dulles area, prompted a lot of discussion. We've been working now for 2 years with the Planning Commission, and we've met with the county attorney's office, and our hope is to rewrite the proffer formula first, is that we're able to regionalize it. The other aspect of it was the way the formula was originally written, it said, this is your cost per pupil for construction, basically, you know. And the formula had a 50% reduction, you know, so whatever it was half. Well, you know, most of the development, you go to Vienna, you get some, you know, some woods get knocked down, you get 3 or 4 homes. It doesn't, you know, that didn't have a huge impact. But now, when you look at 10,000 or plus homes, where we're going to have to generate schools saying this is the cost, and then it's 50%, and then you're going to use a reduced yield ratio, you know, it wasn't feasible. So all of the Board of Supervisor members that I've spoken with have agreed that there has to be a modification to the proper formula, because you know, we're going to pay one way or the other. We have no choice. We cannot continue to have schools
Right.
that are 50 years old and not renovated. We're trying to reduce the temporary classrooms that we have. So Stu, you know, show you how effective Pat is. When Stu left the board, we had 975 temporary classrooms. But you know, this year we're going to have 798. So.
Right.
So, and we're so,
Maybe,
if you think about this, we need to also eliminate temporary classrooms. And we can't do it where we have these competing interests. One way or the other, the taxpayer is going to wind up paying for it, I
Yes.
guess.
It would be very helpful, probably not during this discussion, but I would like to know who determines that formula, what is the process, where are you in the stage of the process, who has to pass that in order for that to be changed, and a timeline on that would be very helpful, because the sooner the better, obviously.
And, yeah,
And-
presumably you can't change it after a development has been approved.
Right. And some developments are exempt and some are not exempt. So the state, a couple of years ago, passed a very restrictive proper law stating that so if you're in the right, in the exempt
Yes.
area, then you're
And
not
I think most
subjected
of
to
Reston
these.
is
Yeah.
probably
Most
in
of
the
Reston
exempt
within
area.
Right,
But the PRC should not get picked up.
right.
Right.
13 to 16 should not get picked up within that.
Well, we've got a lot of questions. I wanted to ask this question. This will probably be for Leslie. This will be for you. So the public facilities section of the comprehensive plan states that the county is going to designate and reserve future public facility sites that will be required for future growth and development. The comp plan also states that the county is going to acquire sites for public facilities in advance of demand through purchase or dedication. So that being the case, we already know that the school system is saying they can't afford it. So I guess, and maybe you can't answer because you're not the supervisor, but I guess my question would be to anybody who can answer is, how are we meeting the comprehensive plan if we don't have the money to get the sites ahead of demand?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, we rely on either land dedication or monetary contributions. And while it's identified in the plan, as applications come in, everybody's, schools evaluates it, fire, rescue, parks, everybody evaluates that plan, and we are keeping track of the cumulative impact.
Right.
But, at some point, as Kevin said, there will be a trigger for some type of development, and when we're getting close to that, then we may ask, or if a development comes in and the schools, I say, this is a great place for a school site, then that could be part of the
Right.
proper negotiation that's going on as these
Right.
individual
This says
applications come
advance
in.
of demand, so that makes me think that it should be happening now. And I guess one of the questions we all have is how much do you guys coordinate with each other, the county planning and zoning and the school planning and zoning, to accommodate for something like this?
Well, they're coordinating as part of this planning commission and schools committee that they have, that the planning commission has. And I know that, and again, I'm the zoning administrator.
Right,
So
okay.
my document is the zoning ordinance, not the comprehensive plan, but, I'm familiar enough with it. And so they are working together to kind of address some of those issues. The first part of that committee dealt with vertical schools, in office building kind of development, and I think they put together some standards for that.
Right.
Yeah, how much discussion or coordination goes on between county schools planning and county planning? Do you know what I mean?
It is.
There's two groups, I understand, but there should be some coordination so you're meeting the comprehensive plan goals.
Well, until, we, from our side, we knew that we had to be more assertive once, as I said, once we saw what was happening in the Dulles corridor, because there was no way out for us. I mean, they're going to build it out. I still needed a second elementary school with no land. Folks have asked, where are we going to build this high school? Well, I mean, I'll be retired, but the only land that we own is 38 acres, and that's on Hutchison, and that's right at the development. That's our acreage. They'll eventually have to build a high school there, and we don't have a choice. I mean, 38 acres at $2 to $3 million an acre. There's just no way in heck that we can do that. So, and it's right there where the development is. We show that further out because we recognize when that high school is ultimately constructed. This has been long conversations we've had with the board. In fact, September, my planning director and I have a meeting with the board to discuss our boundary policy, and both Pat and Stu know how difficult it is to change boundaries here. But the likelihood is the effect of that high school will touch multiple high schools and boundaries from all the way from the east out here to the west. I mean, you can look at our boundaries and they've evolved over time and they're not very efficient.
Right.
The thing that we're anticipating, and I understand that we're building high density along these transit corridors, but it's going to become more and more difficult to get around this county over time. And that means that we're going to have to make sure that the boundaries, do not meander and stretch too far. I mean, you only have to look. I live, like I said, in Herndon at Drainsville and 7, and I have people there that go to Langley.
Yes, I
They're
agree.
a
And that
mile, they're a
stretches.
mile from Herndon, and they go to Langley 14 miles away. So doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be it, but this occurs all around the county. So, I would anticipate at that time there would be a lot of discussions about all the boundaries.
Can I just follow up? Because one of the points that you made, Mario, was how does the county coordinate with the school system? And I'm pretty sure that I'm on safe ground saying that when there's a proposed zoning change or a proposed project, they ask your staff, Kevin, to tell them how many kids you expect, what are the schools that are impacted, how many kids, elementary, middle, and high school you would expect, and you apply your formula depending on the type of house.
Right, but it's not ours, it's a countywide formula. So we are looking to rewrite the MOU. This is the proper MOU between us and the county, and one is that we would regionalize the yield, so it would be based on the location.
But beyond that,
It's a lot of students.
one of the
when you
things
think
that was
about
my pet peeve when I was on the board, and I thought you had changed it, and I'm pretty sure you have, is if there's 10 projects, residential projects that are proposed from one end of Sunset Hills to the other, that all of those are going to impact, and the question is, what's the cumulative impact of
Correct.
those projects? So if there's a proposal A over by the post office and proposal Z way over by the town center metro station, the county knows that you're going to add those two together and so that they can make an informed decision, or is that not happening
It
when a
is
project comes to the planning commission?
It is happening now, as I said. When we looked at what happened in Dulles, they were looking at individual, there's multiple developments there. And then we sat down with Fred Selden, who's great, and we all recognized that, there was a problem, how many kids were being generated, So now we are looking at it cumulatively. The other changes that, so what we've done is we've changed our projection and planning process. So we geocode every student. We could tell where the development is, what school, under what boundary they would attend, or and things of that nature. So in the past, on the school side, they were, I'm talking 5-6 years ago, they didn't have that capability, but now we do. So I think that the hardest thing is when they're going through their planning meetings, I only have 4 people on the planning staff. you know, is, you know, they want representatives at, I forget what they call the meet. I mean, I don't have, you know, 4 people, 5 people. I can't
To our
send-
staffing and pre-staffing,
Yeah,
is
I
that
don't-
what you're talking
I don't
about?
have enough people to send over there. I mean, it's barely, you know, we don't have a whole lot of staff. Now, I mean, I've talked to, you know, folks that I've worked for, and I said, you know, if you really, really want to make sure you have your seat at the table, that's what you need to do. Also, you know, the planning commission, if you, has been really, really good with us, and I don't want to speak for them, but they recognize also that schools are going to need to be a priority when they start to look at this development.
Well, they
I
should
mean,
be a
the-
priority now.
The
But,
question is, yeah,
go ahead.
But it's just roads and parks or.
there's always a lag between when they get the proposals and when you actually have to build up. So
Right, so
this is going to happen now, and
that's correct.
by the time you get your site, your proffers or funding and bond funding, it's way down the line, and so that's going to create all kinds of pressure. Question for you from a historical perspective. During the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, right, what was your projection from a development perspective for Reston and nearby areas, you know, for these areas, and what did you actually see in reality? I mean, did they match up variances? Did you do an analysis on that? And
Well, you know, so if you remember when I talked about, I made changes to the planning office when I took it over, right? So if they weren't geocoding, which is what you really need to do to know where the kids are. So Reston has the highest transfer rate in the county, meaning they've got nearly, you know, it's 12 to 1,300 students are coming in to the South Lake schools because you have 3 AAP centers, same at Langston Hughes, and a lot of those kids are retained at South Lakes. Now, if you don't geocode the kids, you can't really tell where their source or origin is, right? But so we developed a system that we're able to do that, and you can see what's happening. Now, a lot of this redevelopment, you know, and that's what it's rezoned stuff. It wasn't always zoned for residential. So if you look at 5 years ago, 6 years ago, like that Dulles corridor section, that was 90-10.
Oh, but what I think Shooter was talking about was that, like, let's say, for example, you had the Harrison that was built, and now you have people living in there. So maybe you gave some numbers saying, okay, we expect X number of students to come out of the Harrison. Well, how many actually have come out since it's been
Right,
built?
so those yields are low, and we would have projected low yields for it, meaning, you know,
Do they match up to
Yeah,
what
but
you
do
had?
they match up? So in fact, if you can point to a whole bunch of them within the last 10 years, right?
Right.
So you've got Harrison's, Carlton House, Stratford Arms goes a little bit,
right.
right? That
Center
goes a little
West.
house. That goes a little bit further, but again, that would have given you some data points.
Yeah.
You've got Avant, you've got
Town Center
Midtown,
West.
you've got
Yeah, there's
You-
not a
you have
whole
so
lot,
many-
there's not a whole lot.
coming in from those.
So, but the question is, when those were in the development phase, in the approval phase, and your staff said to the county, we expect 3 elementary, 2 middle, and 1 high school out of this, what did you actually get?
Oh, so what we're seeing, if you recall, when I was talking about those multifamily, multi-story, those are the ones that are, when we project, because we're using countywide averages, in that case, sometimes it could be heavy in our favor. So if I throw a building like Skyline in, or Rotunda, that's a similar type of building, you're going to get yields that are vastly higher than you get in newer units. Now, you're going to get kids in that particular area, but it is, you know, so those buildings are, what are they, 5, 6 years old now? I can't remember. I mean, some of them,
Some of them are,
Some of them
yeah.
are not.
right. And
The answer is, we don't know.
well, yeah, you won't, but you are going to hit them at, 20, 25 years in. You're going to start to see kids out of there, and then it'll just continue to have students. Now, I think the other thing for most of us who live in Fairfax County, we have a mindset of what a conventional school should look like. We think it should 10 acres on an elementary site, playing field, things of that nature. So. But that's not really what the future is going to hold. One, we can't procure more land. I mean, it may be possible here or there. So 5 years years ago, we had this exact problem down in the Bailey's area. And so we were looking for a site. None of the sites were good. And, you know, I was just waiting and waiting because I knew that politically we'd never get around to it for a couple of years. And we, at Bailey's Elementary, we had nothing but trailers and a modular and no room. And then ultimately, we had to start, as our population increased, we started to build classrooms and the library. I mean, I didn't have a choice. I mean, we had to house the kids. So we debated building a school at a local middle school. Ultimately, we took an apartment, or not an apartment, a 5-story office building and made a school out of it. I think that over time, if we all think about schools the same, programmatic delivery is going to be vastly different over the next 25 years. And so this is what we talked about, and when we rewrote the schools portion of the comp plan was instructional delivery is going to be different, the type of school is going to be different. Maybe you're going to have satellite campuses, you're going to have, you know, things that just don't are not the same as we normally have in Fairfax County. So, for example, McNair Upper, which is in the Hunter Mill District, where we're building the school on the back of the property, we combined, this is a community school, so we designed it specifically. So the classrooms, we built the classrooms as it's all part of one building, but a classroom tower, and then because the site is smaller, sharing with another elementary, we also stacked the cafeteria and the gym, things like that. We built a small community center in there, and we also have community service delivery, so we can have social workers or anybody else in there. So the community has full access to the school during the day. So I think that we have to anticipate in the future, because the shortage of land will only affect schools, is that the government services are also going to have to share the sites. And this is what, 10, 15 years from now, that is going to be the reality, is we're going to have multiple government services delivered out of the same facility.
We have a lot more development, that is.
Right?
Right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Of course, yeah. Do you have any questions, Bob? I think we've covered what we discussed.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of
Yeah, go
questions.
ahead. Why don't you go ahead?
I've got a whole list. I would like to know, that you may or may not know, but the letter from the county to RA and CPR stated that the county is going to share what private sector commitments have been made to address school impacts. We've already talked about proffers and the change in proffers, but have there been any other commitments that have been made, maybe with regard to offering of some sort of land that you're aware of? No. So it's just been proffer money that is already standard.
Mhm.
Okay. How does the county work with developers to vote specific site or land? And is this being done, or can you provide some examples? I know it's been done in the past, but is there anything how does that work? What does that process look like?
County work with a developer.
Yeah, to
Basically
either to
give you a
obtain
site,
some
a
land or
location,
something,
obtain
so
some
because we don't
land.
have,
See, which
obviously.
is the question I had as a follow-up to your comment that where am I going to get the money? The developers have to come up with a way to provide you the space, right?
Correct.
They're not, and that's part of the problem. They're not generating the entire capacity for the school, and that's why you have to be a little bit careful when you accept proffers, because you can't put the burden of, a region on one or two developers, and that's what's part of the negotiation as you get, the Ludi Clotes Elementary School was a large residential development. I mean, it was primarily residential, and as part of that development, the county and the staff negotiated as a proffer a school site.
Right.
And that school was built. They didn't, they dedicated the school site, they get density off that dedication. They didn't build it. I mean, the funds weren't,
Right.
but they dedicated the land, and so some of that is
Right. And
is looked at. The problem is we don't have that kind of, having that kind of land available is.
And the formula.
So
Good
let's
to
talk
go.
about, this did recently happen down at the Dulles Corridor. So once we, on the school side, recognized what kind of problem we were facing, first we met with zoning, then the supervisor, and then we actually negotiated with the developer. Now, this was what Leslie already alluded to, is this developer's like, hey, I'm the last in the door, why do I have to, take the hit, And so, of course, that wasn't my problem. I mean, all I would have to do is have a site because we're going to have kids. And my fear was I've got McNair where I need 2 schools, Coates is at 835 kids, and this guy was producing 600 townhomes, which we knew was going to be a ton of kids in that area, And I said, we don't, the kids that already go to these schools, I'm not busting them out, I mean, it's just, we didn't know where we were going to take those kids. We didn't have a place. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot of options. And as I said, we still needed a second elementary school site there. And, I think that what happened there, as you guys are kind of talking about here, is what happens if this development starts to generate kids. Do we have another site? And the answer is right now, all I have are the existing school sites here in the pyramid. That's all that we have. That site that we're looking at there is a 5-acre site. So you think about it, it's very, very small, right? I mean, your average elementary is 12, it has 12 acres. So we get as creative as we can to make the site work. I still have a full soccer field there. We're doing the best that we can on the smallest site. I mean, we're willing to make the sacrifice in order to try to have a school within the community that these students reside. So we thought that was being reasonable. If we could cut down the sites from the less than half of our average elementary and still make it work, then that's what we would be happy to do. We just wanted to have a site for, nearby where the students live. And that may have to be the case here as well. I mean, we're going to need, so if we need an elementary site, then it can't be any smaller than 5 acres, obviously, but we may need some.
Who's engaging with the landowners? Is it the school? Is it the county? Is it the supervisor? Where is that conversation taking place?
In that particular case, we went to a meeting with zoning and the supervisor said, hey, they know what they can do, meaning they know how to build their schools and how to handle it. You negotiate with them, and then zoning will finalize that. That's the only case that's happened so far. The other stuff was negotiated by zoning in the past.
I mean, and we and when they're talking about zoning, I mean, there's that zoning evaluation, that group that does the evaluation of the applications, and as part of that, I mean, some of our staff actually are former in Kevin's office, so they are familiar with school system. Mary Ann Ty and Denise James both worked in facilities planning. But I mean, again, I think as these applications come in, issues are identified early on. I mean, we have pre-application meetings, and so we can start some of those negotiations, as early as possible. But it's kind of like we talked about with the parks. Mm-hmm. It's difficult because, if you want a new park or you want to have, 7 or 8 acres of fields, somebody has to, you have to find the land somewhere. And as Fred alluded to, the value adjacent to the metro is difficult. But again, I think we're looking at different models with the 5 acre, as Kevin talked about. Schools and office buildings, a more urban model for those areas. I think that can still happen.
Leslie, wasn't there a similar model when we built South County? We had a public-private partnership to build South County. We had a developer who wanted a golf course.
That's correct.
And we wanted a school. And
there was a land swap.
And there was a land swap.
And then.
So why isn't that a viable model? I was on the board when we negotiated Coates, the school site for Coates.
I think there was a lot more land available. A lot of what we're talking about is redevelopment. It's already, some of this was vacant land. It was, land that hadn't even been built on before. It was part of the Lorton prison
Well, there's
site.
A lot of vacant land here that the Board of Supervisors is approving redevelopment on. They just approved Gateway last week on a whole bunch of parking lots. So The fact is that there is a lot of land that will be redeveloped from non-residential, non-commercial, just parking lots for office buildings into residential and mixed-use development in Reston that will generate students for the schools. Why isn't the county working with the developers and the school staff to try to head off these issues? Because one of the most disturbing things I heard, and I knew this from when I was on the board, is we can't build capacity until the kids are actually here. And that goes against what Moira just quoted from the comprehensive plan, which is we're not going to improve, we're not going to add residents until we have the infrastructure to do it, and yet that's exactly what's being proposed. And I think that's why only people are wearing yellow shirts here. I could be wrong. But it seems to me there's a disconnect there, and I don't think I'm alone.
And it's a huge disconnect, and the time lag is going to be, really huge, right? Whether it's Parks and Recs, and I hear you on the Parks and Recs as well. This is really the problem. We can't wait till the development has happened and then scramble to try to figure out a place. This is when we need to act, and we are here to actually to help you. So one question for you around that. So you get one of these proposals and you don't like it, you're not satisfied. From the school's perspective, can you stop it?
Yeah, I don't know if I can, I don't know. I mean, normally what happens is.
You say no, you don't like it, you don't have enough.
Well, that's what happened over.
Whether it's
what happened-
offers or land.
What happened in the Dulles corridor? I mean, we knew once I, had all of our yields there, I was like, because they came in little developments one by one. It didn't look that bad until you put them all together, and after I woke up after Pat, I was like, what
That's
are
his
we going to
question.
do? And so, typically, what and in this case, we talked to the folks in zoning, and then we had the meeting with the board member. Now, I live in Drainsville, so then I talked to the board member again and said, this is just a major problem. You just can't have 2,000 to 3,000 kids with no place to put them. And so we got a lot of action. Plus Fred Selden, who looked as well. He was quite alarmed. So I don't know whether we could stop it. That would probably be something that I would have to ask.
Supervisors.
Yes, I
I understand. It's a little bit of a facetious question, but that really is the important thing, right? You wake up and you find out you have,
The
your
county has
needs are
been
not
very
satisfied.
successful in getting, schools, and, I mean, most of the schools that you see today were built on land dedicated by,
No,
a lot of them are.
the majority of the sites that we have were in the 40s and the 50s. We had a program, and actually into the mid-60s. It was a guy named Ed Moore who worked for us who bought property from one end of the county to the other. And in fact, I would say that I don't know what percentage of the parks were built there, but it's a ton. I mean, you remember we built Money's Corner. I built that. That was originally a school site. Now it's a park, but the reason we built the school there. So these sites, he bought everywhere. I mean, you can remember going out to Herndon in the 70s. It would be like to the end of the world. But he was buying sites all through the county. And the proper sites really started to show up around, the stuff that was dedicated was like McNair was one of the first ones, Island Creek. There was a number of those.
Even Lake Braddock Secondary School, there was, some of that was
Yes.
dedicated.
So-
A larger plan to develop
But
it.
I think we had a guy, like I said, who bought land from starting in 49 through probably, I'd say 67 to 70.
I mean, before anybody was living out here.
Yeah, there was nobody there. I don't know how he went to Fox Mill Road to buy that site. I can't imagine what it looked like back in the 60s.
Yeah, one of the concerns that I have is I have 3 children all in Fairfax County Public Schools, is when I looked at the CIP, I noted that the high school that was going to come in was going to be when my 4th grader, who's now going into 5th, was going to be a senior, so he won't even be in that catchment, and maybe we won't need that, but my concern is, again, that we need to be planning now, and I just, if you're telling us we don't have any land, I have a great concern about that, because we shouldn't have overflowing schools before we figure this all out. One of the charms in moving around a lot and living overseas is that you have small classrooms, I think like 15 to 18 per classroom, which is actually really nice. So when I came here to Fairfax County and my first or second year back, I had 35 kids in my kids' classroom. That's really disturbing to me, and I'm a teacher, and I think 35 is way too many. But going back to my questions. These ones. Oh, yes, I wanted to ask this one, and I happen to live by this park. Barron Cameron Park used to be a Fairfax County Public Schools owned parcel, and they allowed the park authority to use that park, but they actually owned it, and I know that it was sold off because they needed the money at the time. But one of the things we talked about was that was a dedicated school site. A lot of people in the area knew that was going to be a school site, and we wondered just, is there any way, maybe this park or another park that's also owned by county or Fairfax County Public Park Authority, is there any way to jointly work together using your MOU to say, the MOU says you're going to save county funds, to maybe dedicate some place where you could have the park authority and the school work together, where you could have fields and a school?
Well, you think that we already do that. I mean, the majority of the fields in this county that are used from recreation purpose are for schools. The majority. Look,
But I mean like an actual park that turns into a site.
To it, right? And so, but you have that everywhere. What Hutchison, everybody thinks is a park. It's a school site. So the Planning Commission is actually addressing this right now, talking about the fact that we have to co-use facilities. So I think that, you know, as I said, over time, this is going to become an inevitability, whether, you know, and we work, the Park Authority and the school system have a good relationship anyhow. But I don't know, you know, at some point we're going to have to cross that bridge. So if we think about these high-density areas, I said, at some point in the next 15 to 20 years, as Tyson's, Route 1, here, the Dulles Corridor, we're going to have a ton of kids emanating from a very small area. I mean, and if we can't buy land, what is the solution? So you either have to co-share facilities. I think, you know, right now we're restricted through zoning what we can build on our sites, and you think about really dense areas, they don't have stadium. You know, you have a high school, no stadium complex. There, you know, a couple of high schools are sharing a stadium. That could be 40, 50 years from now. I mean, they're going to, over time, because we can't buy land, if our student enrollment continues to increase, what are we going to do? You're going to have to get rid of the zoning limitation because you can't buy any more property. The school sites are becoming more and more dense. That is an inevitability.
Well, maybe that conversation between the park authority and the school system should occur sooner rather than later.
Could I, if you don't mind, I just wanted to clarify one thing on the question of too many kids in a classroom and too many kids in a building. Those are different buckets of money, right? Capital funding decides how many classrooms we have in a building, you know, how big the building is, but it's the operation side that determines the size of, you know, how many kids are in a classroom, because that's all about hiring teachers. So you can have a building that is overflowing, you know, out into the yard with trailers, right? But you have 21 kids in a class.
Or less.
Correct.
And the proper money can only go to the capital facilities. It can't go to operational.
Program capacity and actual capacity.
You
Or
can't,
design and program.
Design and program.
Correct. Good job.
they couldn't hear you,
Oh,
but
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Am I
You
supposed
can pull it close to you. Yeah. So she was basically differentiating between in-class number of students versus the school overflowing with students.
You know, I think when we, you know, one of the things that we're seeing right now, just with our enrollment, is we talk about these cohorts. And in this case, I talk about countywide. Last year, our kindergarten, first, second grade cohorts were significantly smaller than the remaining cohorts. So 3 years in a row, we saw that occur. So what we have countywide is this bubble of kids. It's basically from 4th through 7th grade are going to move through the system, but the succeeding cohorts, kindergarten, first, second, it'll be moving through, and if it holds true again, is we're going to start to see a leveling off at the elementary level. And, you know, and I also spoke about the fact that it looks like, at least in Reston, is that a lot of your neighborhoods are aging out at a the same rate. And now eventually, they're, once these folks move, because the single-family homes are always going to produce kids, we know that, and even the townhomes. So you all are going to have a period, just even without this development, where it's going to look like the enrollment is declining. And then what I suspect, which we see everywhere else, is that you start having families move in, and then you start to regenerate it. So one of the things that's occurring here in the county right now is we see this in the Oakton and Madison, Marshall, McLean pyramid, all around Tyson. Remember I said there aren't kids moving in there, but they're moving in these neighborhoods around Tyson. So those are the 4 pyramids where we have significant growth: Oakton, Madison, Marshall, and McLean. I think at some point that's going to happen down here. As the Silver Line's established, Reston, South Lakes, Herndon Herndon has had consistent growth, but you're going to see it here again.
Isn't a lot of the additional growth in student population in those pyramids also coming from transit-oriented development, the redevelopment?
No, it's from
Maryfield?
single family there.
Sorry, no.
I mean,
There are townhouses
Yeah, but
along Gallows Road.
right,
Some
but
townhouses produce
they
school-age
do,
kids.
but they're getting
And that's
more.
right by Marshall, that's right
No,
across
no.
from, right
But-
by.
but you're
no,
getting-
I'm talking about over where SAIC is to be.
Right. But the biggest growth that we're seeing is in the single family, in those, I know they're super
You're talking
expensive.
about turnover of existing
Yes.
houses, but I'm talking about there's been a lot of new townhouses built
Yeah,
in Marshall,
right.
in the Marshall attendance
Right.
area over by, on the edge of Tyson's
Right.
Corner.
But you're seeing there, Pemmon Hills, they're tearing the homes down and building, those type of,
Mansion.
big, right, that you see all through Vienna. And so, but we're seeing it mostly in single family there. But we know that this ebb is only an ebb in the South Lakes Pyramid, and, it won't last that long, and then we'll begin to see it. The first way to tell is always to look at your birth to kindergarten number. So we publish this on our dashboard. You can see the quantity of kids who were born in a particular attendance area, and then 5 years later how many kindergartners show up. And so when you're having a lot of resales is that 100 kids born and 100 show up, that's okay. But you'll see some of these areas where it's 100, 150%, meaning that so they weren't born there, but somehow the families are moving there. So we publish that each year, and it's something that we discuss with the board each November as well. So they have a little bit of an idea of what's occurring.
You alluded to, and I just had a question that someone brought up to me, and I was going to bring it up to you, is eminent domain. I don't know, I know it's not popular for anybody, but has the school system ever utilized that, or
Yes.
is that ever a possibility for the
utilized it.
future?
I
Can you
can't
give an
speak for the
example?
board, but there's two situations that we have, and one was the office building that I talked about. I think they also used it when they acquired the site for Weightless Mill Elementary.
What was it prior?
I don't know.
My kids went to Weightless Mill Elementary
Was it a
School. It was
farm?
somebody's farm,
Right.
Okay, and what was
somebody's
the-
private property.
What was the other one?
It was the office
Bailey.
building.
It was an
Or
office
Bailey's.
building. Okay, all right, I was just curious.
It was, but to be honest, the board really would prefer to avoid eminent domain.
Nobody likes it. I was just curious.
Negotiating.
Yes.
But there are legal implications.
I have one more.
Go ahead.
I was going to suggest something just because I've, moved around a lot, as I said, and my husband, we lived in a city, he went to an urban school in a high-rise that did not offer any athletics. It was like an IB program. And if they wanted to participate in any athletics, they had to go to their catchment area school. And parents, from what I recall, drove their kids, because my brothers went there as well. Some were bused, some took city buses, but it's just an idea. I'm not saying people probably hate that idea,
Right.
but it's just a
So
thought.
what we did at Bailey's is we actually constructed 4 1,500 square foot activities rooms. I mean, these were, almost the size of these rooms. They had wood floors. They were able to move around. We also used the parking lot. So we took out a section of the parking so the kids had outdoor play. you referenced taking the city bus, so we've been working with the county, and our kids now have access to the connector.
Correct.
So the county has been really great in working with us and anticipating this. The other thing to think about is, when I said we have alternative instructional strategies, we lease space for instruction. So in downtown Herndon, by the Kmart, one of the former Kmart, we actually have a lease space there that we use for what used to be known as a transitional school, but now we're calling it Fairfax Adult High. And so these are our kids who are intensive language acquisition. They're typically 17, 18 to 21 years old. And so we have 2 sites. We have that one, and we're opening one at the Plum Center this year. But I foresee an expansion of that. And so these are in leased sites. So part of what we worked on with the Planning Commission was, even though it's used instructionally, it wasn't really the same as a school. So the requirements around, a school site would be a little bit different from a zoning perspective. So I would anticipate.
The example I gave is really only middle and high school,
Right.
so it wasn't like elementary kids taking a bus, but middle and high school.
Mhm.
And I mean, in London and elsewhere, maybe New York, kids take buses and
Mhm.
public transport at a,
Uh,
but, I'm not saying I want it, I'm just saying it occurs.
Well, I think it's fair to say, though, that the school board is very much open to the idea of alternative
Mhm.
locations and alternative programs. We don't really have enough seats in our alternative
Mhm.
schools right now, and those provide flexible opportunities for students as well, particularly at the high school level. So I see that as an opportunity to fit classrooms, here
Which
and
could
there
be then
without
proffered
building.
into the
Well, one of
commercial
the,
areas.
the reason why they came to mind is that school, because it was in a city-high building, it's called City, they didn't have any sports fields or anything. So that if you have a school like that, you don't need any sort of fields or anything like that, because there's not even a sports team. So it's just a, it happens somewhere, clearly.
I wanted to come back, you may have heard there was a large meeting at South Lakes High School last fall to talk about the proposed increase in the density cap for Reston. And one of the things that county planning staff talked about was the fact that there were projects in the pipeline that could not be built if the density cap was not raised from 13 to 16. And I'm just wondering whether the school system has been apprised of those particular projects and weighed in on student yield from those projects. And we're not talking about transit development. We're talking about development outside the transit area.
Well, they weren't specific, necessarily specific projects, but areas that were planned. And I think, depending on if, based on our calculations, and that's what we're going to talk about on Monday, is the persons per acre and the calculations that went into that. I
was at the meeting, and I heard it was not presented at the beginning. It was in response to somebody's question, and somebody said, "Well, if we don't approve this, there are projects in the pipeline that can't be built," is what was said at that meeting at South Lakes High School. So if there were projects in the pipeline that could not be built,
That is correct, yeah.
then what are those projects, and has the school system weighed in on student yields from those projects?
Well, and I think what we were talking about probably was Reston Town Center North. When you combine that with some of the Boston properties that's now coming through.
I mean, Gateway, Reston Gateway.
Pardon me?
Gateway, is it, do you count Reston Gateway?
Which
No, that's in
is,
the transit
It's in the
corridor.
is that PRC?
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. That is
That's what I thought, it's
PRC.
in the transit
That's
corridor.
what I thought
So
too.
that's not what we're talking about. We're
No, but
talking
it is
about-
PRC.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
No,
are.
that's what I'm, oh, it is.
It is
okay.
PRC.
It is
It is
PRC,
not the
it is
town.
PRC.
So have you taken that into account?
So here's what we have talked to the supervisor's office about a couple properties there to potentially build a school if it's needed. It would obviously be a smaller, it would be not a smaller school, but a smaller site. So it would be closer to what you talked about. So yes, we've investigated that if it's needed. It would be a 5-story, 1,000 student elementary school.
And where would that
That
be?
isn't what I
exactly?
asked.
In that particular region, we've had, I don't know how many times we've talked about it. So if, you know, but and part of the conversation that we've had is that, I'm still going to tell you that you're going to have surplus seats for it. 1,700 is a lot of seats, or 27.
Right.
It's a lot of seats.
One of the things that we asked for, which I would love to see, is with each property with each rezoning that's put in, you are providing a formula, and
And a
then there's a
memo.
chart.
We have a memo.
Yeah, I'd love to see like the most current, because it gives you how many students are coming out of each development that's projected, and either what's been approved and what's in the pipeline. I found that to be very concerning with regard to certain
So you want
elementary
to
schools.
subtotal them all of them?
I would love to see that.
Okay, well, let me make a note and talk to my planning staff, okay? So
Yeah.
you want everything within,
I want everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that's either been proposed and approved, yes.
okay.
I think it stems all the way back to when Lake
Since-
Ann was developed,
Since,
or going to be.
since the new plan was adopted, or what are you asking?
How far back would it be?
The new plan. You can go back to
2015.
2015. Since then, whatever was developed has been approved.
I think it'd
The
just be
new
really
plan,
helpful to
yeah.
see that chart, because when I looked at that, my eyes about popped out of my head, and I was like thinking, Sunrise Valley seemed like to be getting a lot of students, and I was hoping that they had all the capacity. I mean, I know it's down the line, and some of those properties aren't being developed just yet, but it does concern you to look at something with those numbers, because when we talked, we said, think of those numbers as a classroom, right?
Yeah.
Each,
I mean, I calculate about 115 to 120 classrooms based upon the growth, right? And where are you going to put them? Based on 25 students per class, I mean, so, which is the average that I would like to think, right? Give or take 10. So
Yeah,
that's what I
we-
calculate.
Right, and so when you look at our enrollment in the CIP, until the development breaks ground, I don't put the numbers in here. If I did, I would be way off, when I
Right.
talk about Tyson's. You have to see,
correct. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
I just want to see the same kind of trajectory, right?
Right.
If we know that you're going to get a need for 120, so over a period of 10 years, 15 years, do I see that in this? Is a question, right?
I want to go back to, I mean, I know that you're sending, not you, Leslie, but the planning and development county gets the applications, they send over something to schools, schools send something back. I'm not sure when the board gets involved, I'm not sure when the supervisor gets involved, but I would like to know how much coordination there is. I mean, are you guys ever having like team meetings or group meetings or, summit meetings to kind of like discuss? I mean, is it really just when a comprehensive plan comes out? I mean, you guys ever really sitting down and kind of talking about it? I know you're having a meeting with the planning commission about this 2/2 disconnect, but I just want to know, like, to me, it'd be nice to know that there's a lot more coordination.
so you're covering a long period of time, right? And so we have a proposed development, and we don't know how long in the future. They'll give us a quantity of units, the type, and the quantity. We can review the plan, we can cite it, so we know the location. And then the yield, we're applying the formula according to the original MOU, which says, hey, you take the countywide average of this type of unit, that's how it works. That memo, I think the board, when we issue the memo, our school board member gets a copy of the memo right away. And then I'm sure that the board of supervisors also receive it. Frequently, we'll get a comment from our own board member who's already reached out to the county board member, asking, what's going on, if they're particularly concerned about a school, or we have our own discussions with our board members about what do we think the impact is going to be. Again, I think that the revised, the MOU will most likely, depending on the area, you could see higher yields. Because as I said, when we're doing the projections, by the time they break ground, we may have, because we're not, we have to be honest with our board member and say, this is how many kids we think is going to be generated here. And then they break ground. We start at that point to anticipate which grades are going to show up, and you'll see it in the school.
But it also starts before then, when the county is doing planning studies like Embark or like Reston, and the schools and all the public facilities are involved in those discussions and providing feedback and input into, so that they can, when they're creating the plan, and they, they talk about, because sometimes the plan gets as specific as they would like to see a school site in this general, vicinity. And so, I mean, we are always communicating with the school system in order to address it. And again, also during the CIP process, too.
I think it might be, just to close out on that one, it might be useful to get a list of, frequency of meetings and, the level of discussions you've had in the last 3 to 5 years. I think that might give a good sense.
I can tell you what
Yeah.
that is. I don't even have, I have an entirely new planning staff over the last 2 years.
So okay.
Are you
Yeah.
talking
I
about?
mean, is it like a monthly meeting? Is it quarterly? Is it like something comes over the
Just
transom and
depends
then you
on the
talk?
particular situation at hand, where
Well, the committee
where the
meetings are
development is.
regular.
Like I said, I don't have staff to send over there and sit in their staffing meetings when I only, have a few people. I mean,
But I think
You know.
Not that
the
often.
idea of sort of reviving the Planning Commission Schools Committee, which
we're
was.
already done that.
I know, it was kind of dead though a few years ago, and it was revived, and I think the idea of that was to provide, the opportunity for more proactive planning together, and I think what you're talking about, so the conversations are happening a little earlier.
Yes.
And the schools have more of an
Right.
opportunity to be heard earlier
Right.
in
Correct.
the conversation, and I think that's yielding fruit.
It is, yes. Mr. Fred Selden's been really, really great to work with over there with zoning.
That would be a huge improvement, because I remember being on the board when the county approved those 2 high-rises behind Oracle. And all we got was a memo saying, they're going to build 2 high-rises behind Oracle, and here's how many kids are going to come out of them. Let us know if you have any questions. So it wasn't like anybody asked what we thought.
Yeah, like I said, that, we figured out how to be a little bit more assertive and make sure that we're part of the process.
Correct. Right.
And the Planning Commission, I'm convinced, will be helpful in this regard as well.
I mean, that initiative really, that came from our board and the Planning Commission together. They wanted to have a better conversation. And their schools committee, I think, is the whole Planning Commission. That's my
I
understanding.
think it's a committee of the whole.
Committee of the whole.
Well, they're all there when we have our meetings. There's like 5, but I can't remember. I don't know if they can all vote. There's standing members, but I think it's been it's a little
Well, and
over
that-
2 years.
And then that was, the comp plan was amended to talk about the adapt, they came up with the language with regard to, and that's in the policy plan. So the policy plan has all of the objectives for public schools and what have you. And I don't know, they're not in the specific area plans, but that's in the policy plan. And that's where they came up with the adaptive reuse of buildings for public schools and educational purposes. And that's where guidance was put into the comp plan, because as each development proposal comes forward, they're not only looking at the site-specific planning text for that area, but they're also looking at the policy plan dealing with schools and parks and, public safety and all of those other things, and using those objectives and policies as a guide to help.
I think it,
foster.
this is a political conversation at some level. It has to happen at the level between the 2 boards. And it's actually been at least a year since the 2 boards got together. It was during my time as chair, and I don't think we've gotten together since then. So it's
I
time.
know. I've actually sent personal emails to both boards saying, when are you going to?
The meeting
Oh,
was the
I'm
budget.
sorry. That's on the budget, yes.
On the
It's sort
budget,
of a-
you did meet, yeah.
Sort of a retreat
There's
is more what
never
I'm
been-
talking about, where we sit and talk about things like
Like-
I think they talk about that as part of the budget.
how's the coordination, the
Yeah.
planning coordination going.
It would be nice to see that.
Specific project areas, opportunity
Yeah.
neighborhood is a joint county and county schools endeavor.
Right.
And that's an ongoing, regular collaborative effort.
Right, no, and that's wonderful. I'm thinking, I do remember us talking about the Planning Commission Schools Committee and the progress that we were trying to make in coordinating there, and I don't know that we've come back to that as two boards looking at it. So
And
maybe-
it's so important, and as I said, and that's where I started out, is when we move, and when anybody moves, schools is like number one. Even if you don't have kids in schools because you're wanting to choose a home that has a good property value. And it's just really so vital, so it would be nice to see more coordination between all the groups. But as I said, I went to a planning commission meeting, and that was where I met you, and so I was really thrilled to see that you were meeting with the planning commissioners about.
So I want to say, each time when I've ever approached the county board member about a specific issue with development, Kathy was great. All the county board members have all been quite responsive whenever we raise an issue.
Right.
Yeah, that's-
But it is just, going back to the beginning, it is concerning that we're talking about raising the density in Reston and the PRC, but yet we don't have really anywhere to put a school site, even though the comprehensive plan for Reston calls for school sites. So it's quite concerning as to, it just seems to me it's a disconnect. I don't know.
But we're talking about a question that may not have to be answered for 20 or 25 years either.
When it will
Yes.
be harder to buy land.
But-
Yes,
Exactly.
When it will
yeah,
be
but don't push it on my kids.
Yeah, and 2025 it could happen a lot sooner. Right?
Or it doesn't have to happen at all.
So,
It's called deny.
No, you
okay,
are,
so I want to,
you are right.
I'm not sure you can answer that question, or I'll get a response to that now, but I also wanted to talk about the transportation impact in terms of schools itself, just the schools. In the last 5 years, with all these, even the little development that we've had, with the TSA, how many trips, the trips from schools to different schools to homes to pick up students, have they changed? Have the number of trips gone up? How have they gone up? Has the time changed, right? And then
Are you
going
talking about the later
forward,
high school start, or what do you?
not just high school starts, I'm just talking about the impact of the development on the school, the trips to pick up and drop off students and the time that it takes. And then ultimately, I want to talk about, the cost to buy the additional buses if you need to buy the buses.
Well, we hope to cut down on buses if possible, but, I hope, since I only have 6 months before I retire, so Pat, it'll take her a while to get me fired, but, one of the reasons our schools are great, we have roughly 189,000 kids at the end of the school year. 21,000 of those students do not attend the school in which their boundaries. 12%. So we start talking about transportation, the first thing we should look at is our own programs. I mean, this has been an ongoing discussion. I mean, so that's a significant amount of students. It's amazing I can even project close when 12% of the students are not going to be where they live. And so, but we're going to have to make the boundaries smaller because traffic's going to become more dense. The other challenges are going to face, we're not going to have, now it's $4 a gallon gas, or $3, whatever it is. But into the future, we've talked about it with the board. Can you imagine 15, 20 years ago from now what it's going to cost to transport these number of kids that we do?
Kevin, the bigger issue is if you add 10 or 20,000 more students to Reston, how much longer is it going to take to get kids across the
A
toll
lot
road
more.
to South Lakes High School, to
10 or
Langston Hughes Middle School?
20,000.
And so even if you have a high-rise development that doesn't produce any kids, it impacts children who go to school in Reston. And that's, the question is not, should the school board have an advanced academic center at every school? That's not the question. The question is, if we have more development in Reston without road capacity, what's the impact on school children, whether school children come out of a particular development or not?
And the question is, the follow-on is FCP is planning for that?
Yeah.
Is it even in the calculation in terms of, additional buses to buy, the whole transportation logistics, basically goes for it all.
Remember I said that we're going to have a discussion with the board in September about boundaries. I mean, and I've said it a couple of times, it's clear that I can't have boundaries that are spread out to the end of the world, right? And So, what does that mean? You have a development, then we're gonna have to change boundaries for schools exactly based on the time on a bus. I mean, one of the questions the board may want to wrestle with is how long is too long for a student to be on a bus for? If they say, hey, we no more than 30 minutes on a trip, then we would have to, yes, we could calculate that. I don't know what it's going to be.
I
You know.
think that's the thing. Transportation is complex, right? As you
Right.
know, there's so many factors. I don't know how easy it would be to kind of pull out, what is what is the factor of increased development? And I'm guessing that the county has traffic counts. And if that's what you're talking about.
Well, for every zoning application, there is a traffic count and an estimate of additional trips, rush hour, non-rush hour, from the development. And the question is, if those trips are on a bus route, then it impacts how long it takes the bus to get from point A to point B with children. And so if you look at a zoning application, you will see an analysis of trips per day to be generated by people who are going to live in that development. By the way, the more units, the more trips. Now, obviously, if you're in the transit corridor, there is some factor built in for the fact that people are walking to the metro station. But there are developments at the far reaches of the transit corridor where even if you're going to take metro, you're going to drive to metro, or you're going to take a ride on bus. But the real issue is those counts are estimated and they're including in the zoning application, so they're knowable.
Right. You're asking how much would it add student trips?
I'm asking, what is the impact of 80 rush hour trips on temporary road to school buses that use temporary road to get from the shelter to Lake Ann Elementary School? I'm just giving as an example. And how much longer is it going to take to get those kids to school? Right. Those are legitimate questions about development, whether kids come out of that high rise or not.
Ride the bus and don't
Yeah,
get dropped off because they go to
Have you
childcare.
seen any change in the last 5 years since we've had development?
Bus rides?
Because it takes time, the bus rides.
And we've
It
actually,
takes a lot of time for us to get across town now in the last 5 years.
I
Right, and so
hadn't
school
noticed
buses
on my way to
obviously-
work, but as I traverse Reston, I think when we moved to we went to late high school starts, our entire transportation was changed. Everything. And the other thing that we did is we reduced the quantity of bus stops, if you recall. So that we have bus stops where now a student can walk up to a mile to the bus stops. So they're staying on more major thoroughfares and things like that to pick up the students. So, but no, I don't know that.
Yeah, measuring it
Transportation's
is
looked
a
at
bit of
that.
a moving target because we keep making changes to transportation.
Do you know
Right.
how long it takes to get across the toll road at Wheelie Avenue at 8 o'clock in the morning?
Oh,
It
I
takes
do.
a long time.
Yes, I do.
And our stoplights opens around, 8 o'clock? isn't it?
8:15.
Actually, at 5:45 this afternoon, it was a bit challenging.
Yeah.
It was a little bit, yeah.
And that's the data, maybe that's
That's
a
what we're
follow-up to
talking
We
some.
don't, we're not
Yes,
going
no,
to get
that's
to
a good
that.
That's
question.
a-
I don't know.
You'll
I
see
get
what are the changes we've seen.
Right.
I'll ask, but I know that they have it, okay?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify, because you made a comment about that, with all the development potential, you're talking about 10 to 20,000 students, and those are maybe 10 to 20,000, 10,000 units, but they're not going to generate 10 to 20,000 students. I mean, if you just look at the
Yeah, that's what
document that was attached to this, we're not even anywhere close, and that's quite a bit of the development that's already been approved and that even is pending. So I thought that number of 10,
I don't think I saw it.
well, you did, you said it'll generate 10 to, maybe that's not what you meant, but you said it would generate 10 to 20,000 students, and I just was like, whoa.
Oh,
I mean, I would look at
People.
it purely as buses getting across already congested, we're going to go to, from a traffic congestion perspective, level of service, we'll go to E or F, so which means it's going to take more time, more buses, more students.
Before we go to questions, I wanted to just go back through some of the things we talked about that we wanted to see, and if you can provide them in time, that would be great. One is that chart that's on the back of that sheet that talks about the development and how many students are coming from each development, either projected or that has already either been approved or is in the pipeline. The one.
I want to see that update, because that one's dated, what, October 2017?
Yeah, like a current list would be great.
I don't know if you have something.
I think it's really interesting to see. I'd like to look at it. The other thing that we talked about, but I'd like to get some concrete stats, is we talked about that chart basically saying, here's what we anticipate coming from X. It would be nice to get some, if someone has time, which nobody ever seems to have someone just go through maybe 5 or 6 of those already approved and living in and just say, here's what we projected a long time ago, and here's what actually came forward
You just
from
want
that
actual
development.
yields?
Hmm?
Actual yields?
Yeah, like actual
Actually,
yield. Yeah, I think just, it doesn't have to be the entire
Actual
sheet of
versus
it, but it would be interesting to see just some statistics, just to see how close those were. And then we also talked about your proffer formula changing, and I would like to know, like, who's involved, where you are in the process, what needs to happen, when those meetings are occurring, just so that I mean, someone like me would love to follow that through and attend a meeting, write an email. I would like to get involved some way so that we can kind of make sure that that happens sooner rather than later. It seems very vital in this process.
And when you anticipate that process to get completed, so you have a good outcome.
I'm confident we'll have a good outcome. I'm relying on the planning
have
committee.
to.
Retired.
That'll be February. It should be by February, I hope.
Well, but I mean, I think that's a fair offer, right? Is
Yeah.
to get some support from the
Oh, yeah,
community for a
absolutely.
change that would help the
Yeah.
school
Mhm.
system.
And we want to help you get that money. That's,
Well, those are for our kids
yeah, exactly.
That.
and the kids in our community.
Okay, so any other comments?
I think we
Anything
could
else?
open it to the
Sure.
people
Peter, I-
attending.
Before we, yeah. Okay, go ahead. And-
So as the current RA board president and a recent past South Lakes High School PTSA president, I want to thank Sridhar for facilitating, and RA and CPR for coming together and putting, I think, together a lot of thoughtful, insightful questions that had us all thinking, and Kevin, Leslie, and Pat for coming and having a real dialogue about those. And it's important. I was trying to be in listening mode, which is not always my forte, but I appreciated hearing about the different topics that are so important. And Moira just listed several things I think would be good data points for further education so that we get more informed and that we can have even further dialogue that helps move this topic forward. One thing that I heard earlier that I still want to just make a point on, though, is when you were talking about the Dulles corridor area, and gosh, these developments came up, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I was watching it, but I didn't realize it crept up on me faster than I thought. Or it's kind of, I'm paraphrasing, Kevin, but I think that's kind of, and then you guys got a solution, and
Right.
something happened. Reston's a planned residential community. We spent a lot of time several years ago on a Reston master plan update, and as Leslie said, I sat through a bunch of those meetings and I've watched the schools come and say, hey, we're projecting based upon this thoughtful analysis that's been going on for several years, we're projecting this elementary school and this high school and in this time frame. And well, we're different. We're a planned residential community, and we took time to do this plan jointly together so that we won't get surprised, so that we want to see a tracking of the plan versus implementation so that we're not at this tipping point where we're like, oh my God, I wish we would have thought of that. Oh, we did 5 years ago. I wish we would have thought about what we thought about 5 years ago. I mean, we really want to use that so that we come up with processes so we're not surprised, because we spent time with you planning this several years ago and have it in a document and want to use that as our planning guide. I guess soapbox done. But that's just what I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Reston's different that way. We're a planned residential community, and we have a plan.
And we do it at the same time, instead of having, the development occur and then later on trying to figure out what we should have. And we want to help you do that.
Yeah, like I said, you do have, it's going to be a significant period of time before you're going to need a new school.
No, it makes good sense, and the data that points you're saying makes sense. But again, let's watch them grow. Let's make sure we're thinking about, as we're approving developments, where these schools could be. They're on somebody's map somewhere that is a potential area, so that we're not surprised.
So before we turn to audience questions, I just want to say that, besides, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time. We will, circle up within the group, and we'll probably have some follow-up questions and comments, and we'll come back to you, and hopefully we'll get the responses if we have to meet again. Hopefully in a smaller group, we can meet again. I hope. Okay. All right, good. Any comments too? No? Todd? Bob? Okay, good. Questions? Yes. David, yep.
Hello, I'm Dave Roberts. I live in Paramount right now. And I just have just some clarification. When you speak about shared facilities in the future for schools, as co-shared facilities with other county buildings, how does that look from a security perspective, given the heightened concern about student safety now? And is that something that's being considered, or is that kind of an asterisk?
That's a really good question, and the answer is yes. So the community facilities that are within the school building have a separate entrance. So, and they do not, the doors do not release into the school. So their ingress, egress is self-contained. So they can enter the facility only through the community shared piece, okay?
I don't know whether that answers it all again.
No, it is.
That is a concern, I think, in today's world, of how we go about it.
So they do not have the opportunity to enter the school where the children are.
Now, with regard to your projections of students, how do you count? Because these individuals are not always counted in the population figures, as I understand it. How do you count students from Section 8 housing, from the homeless shelter, the unsheltered homeless, and workforce housing? Are those students counted in your projections? Because as I understand it, they're not counted in the overall density limits for Reston.
So the answer is yes. Once a student, so a particular building, let's say a student is not enrolled in the school, right? So when we're talking about these yields, you're looking at a particular building that may have low-income housing that we would anticipate based on historical patterns how many students were generated there. Okay, now once a student's in the system, whether they're homeless or not, they have an ID number. We don't look at their name, that's wrong, but we do count them with an ID number, and then we track them. So the moment they're in the system, we also have them.
Right, the moment they're in the system, but are you projecting for a certain
So
number?
we would do the same.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Tammy? Here. Yeah. We can even move it to the front, I guess.
So you gotta go where the mic is.
Yeah.
Thank you, people from the county and Pat, for your time. I in no way want to impugn what you do. I know how hard you work. I know, Leslie, how many of these evening meetings you're at, because I see you here. My question is higher level, and specifically referring to the Coates School Plan. What I'm hearing tonight is that basically Fairfax County does not have adequate funding for our school system. I look at, why do we have a school system? We have a school system, in my view, because we want to educate young children to grow up, to know enough, to be happy, healthy, and self-sufficient. We want them to be taxpayers instead of dependent on tax. So it is in all of our collective interest to have the very best school system we can get. Okay, we're treading water in the school system. Try as you might, Kevin, you can't pull any more miracles out of the bag. You're already a miracle worker. And I get that. But I also say, because I've heard Moira talk about 35, This is not unusual in Reston. My grandson has 35 in his class. Her children are brilliant. If a child is not brilliant, they will flounder. And you only have access to those tender young years for a very short amount of time before they get the attitude that, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. And then you're playing catch up with an individual to try to bring them back to be stimulated. I know a teacher, a professor, college, who has experience, recent experience at Nova and then at George Mason. We were discussing this, and he said, oh boy, times have changed. In my classes, I spend an entire semester trying to get Fairfax County graduates, and I'm not picking on Fairfax County, I think it's almost everywhere, to learn how to think. They resist that. I don't know whether it's teaching to the test or what we're doing, but we're not maximizing our kids' ability. We don't have a system. And part of the problem, I think, is when we have these little bitty kids, and we're putting them in coats, in two giant buildings, and I don't know, do we have 1,000 kids on that campus?
Yeah, McNair, 1,400.
Yeah, okay, so more than 1,000, and they have one playing field between two buildings. And now has not the Virginia General Assembly passed a law? The children have to have 30 minutes of recess? Well, what do? All stand out on the field at the same time or sequentially from early morning until evening to get their 30 minutes of fresh air in? That's not recess. That's not being a kid. That's not learning cooperation. That's not learning anything that you really do learn at recess. So my concern is not only are our facilities, we are behind the 8 ball in the world, in the nation, but gosh, I would not expect Fairfax. When we moved here, Fairfax was one of the premier school districts in the country, and I don't think it is anymore. And that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Tom.
could I comment on that a little bit?
Yeah,
Is it
sure,
okay?
sure, please, absolutely, go ahead.
You're right. In my 6 years on the board, the message has been the whole time that there's not enough operating money and there's not enough capital money. And on the operating side, we have had a couple years in my 6 years on the board when the Board of Supervisors has been able to provide what we asked, right? And this coming school year is one of those times. So what the school system asked for, the school system got. And as a result, we are recovering in teacher salaries,
Yes.
so, and that's very important. But we have not recovered the class size increases that we have made over the last 10 years. And we absolutely must, as a teacher, you're right. If you want to do the best kind of instruction, you need fewer kids in the room. On the capital side, Kevin, I know that we did, we went from $155 million a year in capital funding from the county to 180.
Correct.
But I believe, we still are some amount short every year in what we need. And do we know, do we have an estimate?
Yeah, I know. I know exactly.
Even the 180 is not immediate, right? This year is
No,
157.
this year coming up, we have 180.
Oh, okay.
180.
The 5
So-
years of the CIP
so
is
just-
400 and
Yeah.
County funds
342 million short.
So,
Five-year CIP.
right, so the board, the school board likes to ask me fun questions. And one of them was, how much money would we need if we were to renovate every 25 years? So that's a lot more than 180 million. So, and I think you may have been on the board that asked me that question a while ago. But so that's a lot more money. It would be 248 million a year in today's dollars. Remember, the dollars are not static. I mean, they go, the cost increases over time. I know the board does the best they can, so they have to maintain their AAA bond rating. It's a challenge. Our inventory is big. It's 27 million square feet. I mean, it's huge. If you think about, we grew by 22,000 students from 2006 through 2013. 22,000. That would have made us the 7th largest school system in the state of Virginia just with the growth that we had.
Right.
So
there was no way to maintain that. So we do the best that we can with what we have.
But I
So-
think it argues for another source of funding for
Source of
capital
funding.
needs. I really
Well-
do. Because the AAA bond rating is very important, and the county can only honestly float so many bonds,
Yep.
but.
I'm going to make a little
That's
comment
a
here.
separate yeah,
It is.
conversation, yeah.
I sat for a very short time on the budget committee for the public schools, and I'm a teacher as well, as I said. One of the things that really needs to kind of be kept in perspective is that there is a political push here. For example, kindergarten by state law only has to be half a day. There was a political push to put it for full day. And when they did that, the superintendent of the schools at the time said, if you do that, we're going to have to put trailers at all these schools, which they had to do. And then Kevin had to figure out how he was going to figure out how to put, accommodate for all of these to get the trailers off the plot.
Trailers.
And in addition to that, yeah, exactly. And he talks about these programs. My daughter's in one, but as I said to you, he traveled a lot. If you go to a place where they don't have all these bells and whistles, you get what you get. And so if you took it away, I'd figure it out, right? She would, we would do what we had to do. So to some extent, it's what we as a community are pushing for. We don't have to have IB. We don't have to have AAP. We don't have to have immersion. We don't have to be busing our kids everywhere. It's a choice. So some of that is not just, it's a political choice, some of those things. So keep that in mind, that it's not just about, it's about what the community is pushing for or what the board is authorizing that the community is pushing for.
And I would like to comment and have a little bit of argument with Moira.
Please do.
Um,
Can
Yeah.
I see how many other people want to
Oh, I'm sorry.
speak? Is there anyone else?
Is there anyone else?
1, 2? Then based on that, we can, okay.
Let me just say this real quick.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah.
For some kids, athletics is the key. It's going to open the door for them. If they're on a team and they have the teamwork and a good coach, that's going to open a door for them. That those particular demographic isn't going to get anywhere else. So I don't think you can wipe athletics. And believe me, I'm the least athletic person on the planet. But I just say I've seen it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rob? Got 2-3 minutes to you, and then,
School board members, thank you for coming. I'm sorry, I have, reality of my life is I have to be in a lot of places. I was at a county board budget meeting this morning, and one of the points that I heard, I guess it's Brian Hill and Joe Mondoro, is that in future, different parts, and apparently Brian Hill has worked with the head of the county school system. I'm sorry, I don't know the name. But the whole point is that everybody has operated in their own pods in isolation, and in the future, there's got to be more collaboration and multi-purpose projects. I lived in New York City for 7 years, and one of the things that the school system did there, to their credit, were use of air rights, sale, let's say, for high-rise apartment buildings over elementary schools. And truly, I mean, I went to a lot of these meetings. Most of my ideas went nowhere. I have this vision over by Lake Fairfax Park near the National Wildlife Federation for a school. I don't know whether it be elementary, middle, or high, but the access to all that recreational space says to me a school should be right next to it to take advantage of all those facilities, okay? I don't know how to make that happen. One question I do have is, I read, for several years, I followed the discussion of a new Western high school, and I remember reading some report saying that the land costs were too high. Well, that was back sometime between 2010 and 2012. As a result of the data centers that are now being built all around Dulles Airport, I don't know the precise number, but land costs have probably doubled. So where are you at? I'm sorry, if you mentioned it earlier, I came in late. But did you mention the Western High School?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So we said the only land we own in that vicinity is Hutchinson Elementary. It's 38 acres.
So, I mean, all I'm saying here is, okay, Lake Fairfax is something like 480 acres.
It is awesome. It's just not near where the population center will be.
I'm just telling you, we got to be creative.
But if they wanted to give us part of Lake Fairfax for a school, we would take it for a future
you
school.
want that for other?
That's a great idea. I advocate for it.
Okay, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, final thing is, what is the trends on use of high school students using cars to and from school? In other words, this is maybe more a problem in places
No, but
like Langley.
so honestly, it depends on the school. Not every school is the same. Some schools, they can't even sell their passes.
Yeah.
It just depends on the location.
But in, let's say for South Lakes High, I don't know.
Pretty full.
I don't,
Pretty full from what, from personal experience. My daughter had to wait for a while to get a spot.
But I mean, I think that's, I would just say, I think that's a good question, and we do have to follow up and see how the free bus passes
Yeah.
on Metro buses
Yep.
are helping, and maybe
Right.
at some point actually pull back the number of school bus seats, or, you know, if we can.
Yeah. It would be nice to look at the data. Yes, please.
Thank you, of course. I think that me and the other gentleman are a little bit on the same wavelength here. My question was, is there a possibility to adjust the zoning and require every developer to include classroom space in future residential developments? Whether that's satellite campuses like you're talking about progressively, or entire campuses. And I realize that we've been talking about recreational space requires elementary schools to be several acres, et cetera. But it seems to me that with every new residential area, there needs to be more infrastructure. So why not require every developer to include that in their development?
We can't require it under our current state code
Yeah.
situation.
As I understand it, it's a very developer-friendly state that we live in. So basically, my understanding is that proffers and conversations with developers are negotiated,
That's the new.
not required.
That's why we have the proffer law that we do now, because of impact fees that were being charged by other jurisdictions in other areas of the state. And the home builders and others push back, and that's why we have the proffer law that we have today.
They have a
And we
strong-
never did that. You know, Fairfax has always been a voluntary negotiated, and it was working fine for us, but.
I think it's an argument for the General Assembly.
Yeah.
I do.
We don't have an adequate, Virginia doesn't have what we call an adequate public facilities ordinance, unlike Maryland, where, you know, they can, Mr. Carter probably knows about that
they
very
can-
well.
Yeah.
Where they can tie.
Yes.
Virginia is a Dillon rule state,
Right.
which means that the counties can only do what the state
State.
allows them. Maryland is a home rule state where the counties can do whatever they want. And this adequate public facilities, this is a requirement in Maryland. So in Virginia, it's very difficult to turn down a project because there's not capacity in schools. That's an adequate public facilities. Now, Reston is a bit of an exception.
Right.
Because you have caps, wherever you put the caps is kind of a adequate public facilities. I hope the state's not listening. It's very similar, but not the same. So this notion of the cumulative, so I don't think there's any projects individually that are past the school capacity. These are the ones that I've looked at, not past it. But when you do it cumulatively, I'm not sure about that capacity. But very difficult to turn something down because of the lack of that public facility. That's for both.
I guess
can
I'm just
only-
sort of
you
confused
can only
because
ask for
I remember hearing earlier that a lot of the developments that are happening on land that was previously zoned not for development. And if you have the flexibility to zone it for residential development, wouldn't you have the flexibility to say, this is for residential development with the stipulation that it
Yeah.
must have these things?
Nope.
Doesn't make sense.
No, no.
You can negotiate that.
Well, we do have the school's formula in the comprehensive
She's right.
plan, so we do get money and we do get funds for it, but you're only, you know,
Zoned
technically
one
to
way.
allow
They
to,
changed.
whatever the impacts of that particular property are, you can't then go out and, you know, make it impact other parts of the county or what have you. It only, and their development is never going to, well, I'm not going to say never, but very rarely you're going to get a development that's going to generate enough to create its own school.
Well, I doubt it, yeah.
And you know, school population fluctuates. It's like this, so it is hard to.
Yeah, but in the case, so you asked the question, which was if it was zoned for commercial, that's how the zoning application was originally approved, and now they want to rezone it to residential.
We get school stuff.
Then, so you
We do
would.
get schools. I mean, that's,
You would get the schools.
you would get a school contribution.
That project was way over capacity. Some people didn't do what I said. Here.
Okay. So one thing I want to add to what I said before is only certain places, even in Fairfax, are allowed to use these proffers. That's a special dispensation. And most of the 100 Mill district, I would say, is probably you can't do proffers.
Yes,
Reston, you can do proffers. Now, what I said before, maybe to repeat it a little bit in a little shorter, perhaps, Virginia is a Dillon rule state, which prevents that you can only do what the state says you can do. Where Maryland is a home rule state, where the localities can create their own rules. The land use planning is delegated to the localities in Maryland. In Virginia, it's held by the state. Now, and the other problem with that is there's no such thing as a adequate public facilities ordinance in Virginia. So while I said you may be able to, on an individual site basis, if you're over what the school's capacity is for an individual site, you might have a case there. Although I don't know that any have been turned down. And I don't know, since I've been on the planning commission, I don't know that any individual case has been over the capacity. But making it a cumulative aspect where you add up all the schools together or all the capacity, that's way more difficult.
What you're referring to is an exempt, right? The new zone, the new
Yeah.
proffer law. There's areas that are exempt from the law, which are the high density areas, and non-exempt, right?
Yes.
So the applicant, what he's referring to is if you're outside of one of these zones and you have a development, the way the law reads is we have to demonstrate the actual impact.
Yeah.
So at the time of that development, the school, this is in theory, because I think I've read the law that they need to pay us for the actual impact, but nobody's really tested the new proffer law because it's written so unclearly, they're not sure how to proceed. But I think if I had a school that was over capacity and then we allowed the development to happen, it could be more money in theory. If, say, you produced enough kids that I had to build a classroom, it would be the actual cost of the classroom, which is not what we're getting now. I'm not an attorney, so I could be wrong.
No, but that's what you should get.
But Reston is you can do proffers in Reston, so Reston is exempt. Where all the areas outside Reston, at least in the Dulles Corridor, except for Tyson's, are not exempt. So,
I have a quick, Howard, do you want to make any comments?
No, other than.
I mean, you've been part of the, yeah.
When Stu left the board and created the Facilities Planning Advisory Council.
Right.
I represent 100 Mill on it, and we've been wrestling with these issues for 7 years. The idea of putting an elementary school, in the first 4 or 5 stories of an office building or residential and trading that for greater density and development actually came out of FPAC. And the push to get the school committee opened up. When FPAC started, the school committee on the planning commission hadn't met in 20 years. So we pushed that. So this group represents at large in all the districts in the county. We have been pushing many, many of these issues. So I'm sitting here and I'm kind of reliving what we meet with Kevin at least once a month. So I'm happy to share with the group, but I got enough to do. FPAC's become a full-time job. But I mean, having this committee and having this conversation is great, and I can share with you that this kind of conversation is going on countywide. It's going on with the community in Embark. It's going on in Tyson's. The Route 28, I mean, what happened on 28 is all of that was supposed to be commercial building. And the commercial market collapsed. And all of a sudden, by right, it became residential. It wasn't the school system's fault. When they did planning, they were planning for office buildings. So it's a very, very fluid and difficult and challenging process. So good luck, and I mean it.
Stay involved. Yeah. All right.
I just want to offer a little ray of hope and optimism into
Thank you.
the doom and gloom atmospherics that sometimes we are surrounded by in these sessions. The county side, the general fund and human services system side of Fairfax County government is working very closely with the Fairfax County Public School System side of Fairfax County government. And everybody who touches the lives of families in the county now recognizes and acts from a place of having to work jointly and collaboratively. And so new models, new structures, new ways of delivering services to children and families are evolving on a daily basis in Fairfax County on the part of the employees in this system, the vast system that is the general fund system and the vast system that is FCPS. And it's having an impact. It's having an impact in the Route 1 corridor. It's having an impact in Reston through Opportunity Neighborhood. That's extending to Herndon. The way we do what we do is different. And I don't think it's reasonable to apply standards or thinking about how things were done in the past to what is going to evolve and continue to evolve in the future. So I just want to reassure people that public servants go into their work to do good for the public. They do not go into their work to frustrate communities or to punish people in communities or to make people in communities miserable. So I just want to put that out there for you to all keep in mind. It's not a total disaster. People are working daily to solve the problems that are coming on the future horizon and that are happening now.
Thank you. I don't think that the conversation has been a pretty constructive.
Well, but I mean, if you don't
Yes,
mind, I mean, I do
please.
appreciate that because I think that may be especially true in Reston. You know, there's something about Reston that engenders and supports that collaborative work among not only schools and county and Reston people, but all the private and nonprofit partners in this area are amazing. And so, and that's what we do have a co-located plan, a co-location of services plan for McNair, and that's because Kathy Hudgens has been all about that for a long time, and we're getting it. So I think Reston's on the cutting edge of a lot of what you're talking about.
Thank you. That's it, I guess.
Yes.
We're done. Any more comments? That's it. Thank you. Switch off the.
They don't